For many, it was a wake-up call that America wasn't really where they belong, and so they packed their bags in search of more welcoming lands. In this video, we'll look at why some African Americans end up returning to the US after making the move to Africa.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and back to another reaction video. So this video popped up on my timeline and I was like, this is interesting. So the title of the actual video on YouTube is Why African Americans Leave Africa After Moving There. And it's by a channel called Backstory Africa. So definitely check them out if you get a chance and go support them. Now, I have not watched anything from this video, but just from the title alone, it definitely intrigued me. And here's why. I cannot tell you how many times I've talked about on this channel how being American, regardless of your race or ethnicity, if you are born in this country, if you are an American, if you live in this country, you are incredibly privileged. Incredibly. I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. If you live in this country and you live under the structure of America, you are privileged compared to a lot of other countries. And I always talk about how many people from different countries, whether it be East Asia, South Asia, West Africa, East Africa, migrate and immigrate to the US and they flourish. Why? Because in this country, we have opportunities. In this country, everyone gets a fair shot to have success because we live in a capitalist society. And say what you want to say about it, complain if you want to complain. Our system is amongst one of the best, in my opinion. Again, compared to many other countries. Now, many people will scoff at that and say, please, America's this, America's that, America has this fault and that fault, and there's so many issues here. And listen, I'm not gonna sit here and blindly say, oh my God, America's perfect, because she is not perfect. She is not. I have no problem saying that. Just look at our economy right now under this current American administration. It's tanking. It sucks. It's horrible. And yes, I want to vote Biden and Harris out of here. But guess what? They are American. And yet, I'm criticizing the government right now, right? So I'm not sitting here and saying that our government is perfect and our system is perfect and it needs no changes. That would be ridiculous. That would be nonsensical. However, one can criticize the country and want it to do better and also love the country that they're in, support the country that they're in, and not want to leave to another country. If somebody said, hey Chuck, we'll give you X amount of dollars if you leave to a different country tomorrow, and you can live your life in that other country, under their system, under their government, and have a nice life. With the quickness, I would say, hell to the no. The reason being is because I understand that being an American, I already have privileges that many other people from other different countries do not have and will never understand. And I'm not foolish enough to believe that the grass is greener on the other side, because oftentimes it's not. All right, I'm done preaching. Let's watch this video together, break it down, and see if I'm correct as to the theme of this video. Without further ado, let's watch it. All right, got it queued up. Let's go.
2019 marked the year of return and 400 years since the arrival of the first slaves to the U.S. This coincided with the call for African Americans to return to their homelands. And since then, thousands of Black Americans have in fact been paying heed to the call and making the move to Africa. Most of the diaspora have been moving to Ghana, but many others have also moved to places like Senegal, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. The reasons for leaving the U.S. transcend an ancestral calling. For many, it's the fractured race relations and an existential trauma that exists in the African American psyche since slavery. This all came to a boiling point after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. For many, it was a wake-up call that America wasn't really where they belong, and so they packed their bags in search of more welcoming lands. For many, their new home in Africa was blissful. A warmer climate, a lower cost of living, better quality food, and a sense of belonging, without the day-to-day challenges of both subtle and more overt racism that confronted them in America. However, not everybody had the soft landing they were hoping for. In this video, we'll look at why some African Americans end up returning to the U.S. after making the move to Africa. We've found that there are 4 main reasons. Keep watching until the end, as reason number 4 will surprise you. First up.
Okay, before we start, just really quickly, when he said the African American psyche, I was like, oh wow, that's a really, really interesting way to put it, because obviously every culture, every ethnicity, every person has their own experience, and oftentimes that experience does affect the way that you see the world. And I always say on this channel that some people only wear the lens of race everywhere that they go. So what do they see everywhere that they go? Race. And racism, even when it doesn't exist in that specific space, it still is prevalent because that's the lens that they're wearing. That is a psyche that they have. And so I think it's interesting that he used that particular phrase or that specific phrase of the African American psyche, because I think that psyche in many ways has worked against many Black people in this country who oftentimes have bought into what I call the victimhood mentality, that everything as far as the American system is rigged against you because of your color. And that's just something that I think many Blacks and Hispanics grow up with in this country, is that message, that perspective, and that does affect the psyche and how you view the world. You think you always have it worst? In your mind, you have it worst until you meet the real worst. Let's keep watching.
No jobs. Many African Americans hold the misconception that when they arrive in whichever African country they move to, that they'll be able to easily get a job. This simply isn't the case. Unlike the US, jobs in most African countries are scarce, with unemployment rates sometimes being as high as 50%.
Wow.
Western world conveniences.
So no jobs, 50%. 50% of some countries' populations have no jobs available. 50%, half the population, which would be insanity if that was happening here in this country. So would that be a privilege? Would that be an incentive to live in this country? The fact that just by merely living here, you have way more opportunities for jobs and for a sustainable life to live? Would that be a privilege? I think so.
Western world conveniences. A lot of the diaspora often fail to recognize how cushy their lifestyles are in the West. Only when arriving in Africa do they realize what they've taken for granted. Simple examples include basic road infrastructure with sidewalks. A lot of African countries may have tarred roads, but often don't have sidewalks.
Wow.
This means that walking from A to B often isn't an option. So you find yourself driving or taking taxis everywhere. Another example is online shopping. In the US, one can buy an item on Amazon using one-click checkout and it'll be with you later that day. E-commerce may well exist in Africa, but getting an item delivered to you may not be possible. This is because many parts of Africa don't have traditional addresses. The houses don't have names or numbers, and street names often don't exist. As a result, people often have to revert to providing landmark references such as the yellow house opposite the post office next to the park.
I wanted to make one point also. It's like, and that's getting back to food or things you purchase. I'm noticing this is what I did in the States. When I got, like, we drink almond milk or certain dairy products or certain things, I was used to them lasting, once I opened them, like 9 days. Well, it's different here with the product we got. It lasts maybe 5. It says it on the carton just like it does in the States. But those are the things you have to look into, because when I first got here and I got the almond milk, I didn't think about it. I just started keeping it for the amount of days I was used to. And I said, oh, I need to read this and see what it says. I'm realizing it's the less amount of days. And so those are the things you have to look at too. Things that maybe you were used to getting of certain products that maybe had an expiration date different. In the States, it may be different here.
For some folks, not having these Western conveniences is more important than they realized, and before long they start to miss the comforts of American living and end up moving back. Culture.
Well, ain't that interesting? Convenience, which is 100,000% correct, which is why I say we are so privileged in this country, because like they said in this video, you can go on Amazon and say, oh my God, I need envelopes, or I need, I don't know, frames, or I need hair gel. I need something right now. You literally can order it in the morning and have it by the afternoon, the same day, just like that. I do it all the time, all the time. I love Amazon. I do it all the time. Could you imagine going to another country and you can't do that? If you order something, good luck if it ever arrives to you. That is a huge deal. And the whole sidewalk thing, I didn't even think about that, but I have seen images and I've seen videos before, and I guess it never occurred to me that, yeah, in a lot of these countries, there are no sidewalks. It's just, you know, one big street and you hope you don't get hit by a car. And it's like little things like that that we as Americans take for granted. 1000% take for granted. And again, it's like when you complain about this country and you complain about everything and you neglect the perks that come with just being an American, just being born in this country comes with innate privileges that other people would kill for. And so often people don't realize that. So often people just think that this country's the worst and the oppression. I mean, people love saying oppression. You don't really know what oppression is until you are living in a freaking hut. Okay? You don't know what oppression is until you live in a land where if it rains, you don't know if you're going to have a house the next day because what you're living in is not stable. That's oppression. Not knowing if you're going to eat the next day. That's oppression. I'm not saying people don't struggle in this country. People struggle in this country. But let me just say this. I think most third world countries would kill for the accommodations of a person in this country living on welfare or public assistance because you've got it made. You've got it made compared to what they go through and their system. And again, I'm not saying that we should ignore the issues of this country because there are perks. Of course not, right? Like, let's talk about what we can do to be a better system, a better country, a better society, a better nation, always. But I do draw the line when people start saying things like, I hate this country is the worst, this country is full of oppression, this country is the lowest of the low. Be careful what you wish for because, like this video is showing, the grass is not always greener on the other side. And yes, you indeed, even you, Black American or Latino American, are very privileged, very privileged.
Culture. African Americans often erroneously believe that when they move to Africa, they'll fit right into the culture like a hand in a glove. This is very rarely the case. Although their ancestors may hail from the African country they have moved to, being so many generations removed from this country means that culturally they have very little in common with these people. Don't be expecting grits and deep fried chicken in Ghana. There aren't going to be any gospel singers in Senegal. Many people in Africa have never heard of Steve Harvey and don't care. The ones who try and adapt can sometimes make it work, but culture is a complex thing which is hard to articulate into words. It's also a feeling, and sometimes that feeling for African Americans in Africa just isn't there.
Here in America, you have selected different types of foods. If you want Mexican, if you want Italian, if you want Jamaican, if you want all of these different types of foods, when you get to Africa, those areas who have that, if they have that, are going to be tremendously high to eat at.
Yeah, so this is definitely a pretty deep one for me when it comes to culture because I think the saddest part about the transatlantic slave trade is that one of the key things that was done to Africans back then was an erasure of the culture, right? There was a deliberate attempt to erase the culture of many of these African people from different tribes because they felt as though, the Europeans felt as though if they held on to their culture, it would keep them strong, it would keep them independent, it would keep them one unit. So they wanted to pretty much erase and eradicate the culture that many of these people came from, whether it be the language, the music, the religion, etc. They wanted to eradicate that. And that's probably one of the saddest things about the slave trade, aside from, of course, the obvious, right? Treating people like animals and cattle, but it's losing your sense of culture, which is really sad because most people who don't come from a slave ancestral background are able to pinpoint their culture, are able to pinpoint the music, the food, the language. Even if they live in this country, they still are connected to the culture of their ancestry because it's still prevalent in their life. They know exactly where their ancestors came from, and they even visit those countries and they feel connected to those countries. But for many African Americans, they don't have that because many African Americans, they had to create their own culture here in America because they lost their sense of culture after 4 or 5 generations of African slaves living in this country. That definitely is a sad fact, but it's also a very real fact, right? If you are going to Africa because you want to connect, you're going to have a difficult time because there are so many different cultures within the continent of Africa, much less West Africa, that you're going to have to adapt to and get used to and understand, whether it be the music, the clothing, the speech, the food, the system, it's completely different. Just because you look like somebody else does not mean you share the same experience, and it does not mean that you're going to understand each other in the same way. You're just not. I'm Puerto Rican in ancestry, but I never lived in Puerto Rico longer than a year. When I was a kid, we moved to Puerto Rico and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and we stayed there for a year and then we came back to the States. I don't even remember because I was so young. If I was to go to Puerto Rico today, I would be a chicken with his head cut off. I wouldn't know what to do. I don't speak fluent Spanish, and I don't understand the Puerto Rican culture on the island because my experience has been an American experience, a New Yorker experience, a New Yorican experience, which is vastly different as far as the way I speak, clothes that I wear, my perspective, even the food that I eat. I love Puerto Rican food, but I also love Italian food. I love Chinese. I love Mexican. Like they said in the video, I love variety, which is something that we have in this country that so many other countries, especially third world countries, do not have. You eat what they have, and that's it. And that could be a huge culture shock. When you're used to being pampered with choices and suddenly you don't have choices, that's a hard pill to swallow. But beyond just the choices, I think what really struck me most, which I found to be really sad, is the cultural aspect. Because I'm sure many African Americans would love to connect with their ancestral cultures. But they don't really know what those cultures are because many African Americans don't even know which country in West Africa their family derives from. Because like I said, Europeans purposefully mixed many of the African tribes together who spoke different languages, who had different religions, who couldn't really communicate with each other because they come from different backgrounds within Africa. That was done on purpose to dilute the culture. And that is truly sad. That's like erasing somebody's history. That's incredibly, incredibly sad.
Lack of choice. America is perhaps more the land of plenty than the land of the free. You never have a lack of choice when making a decision in America. If you want to book a flight from New York to Los Angeles, you can choose from more than 6 different airlines. In most African countries, you may only have one airline to choose from. If you want to furnish a house or apartment, you have a cornucopia of choice when it comes to sofas, rugs, and tables and chairs. In Africa, this choice will most certainly be more limited. The lack of choice makes things more one-dimensional and also will invariably mean that prices on goods and services will be greater.
Then you want to go ahead and buy the items that you're so used to, whether it's dishwashing liquid, whether it is clothing, whether it is, whether it's cleaning items, whether it is, the food, or whether any item that's got to be imported in, it is going to be a task on your pockets.
All in all, every country has its pros and cons.
Really quickly, like I said, choice. That is a privilege. When you live in this country, you have choice, whether it be of food, whether it be of contractors for your house, whether it be booking an airline, getting your hair done, getting your nails done, what food you want, what clothing store you want to shop from. Like, we have a plethora of choices. Just go to any food app here in the States and you're going to have literally hundreds and hundreds of restaurants to choose from within the same category. That is such a privilege. And we don't think about that stuff, right? We're like, oh yeah, it's Uber Eats, whatever. But go to a third world country, that doesn't exist. Like I said, you get what they have and that's it. And you better make it work. And again, those are the things that we as Americans take for granted. And when I say privilege, that's what I'm talking about. You may not like certain things about the system of America. You may want to complain about certain things. That's on you. But one thing you have to acknowledge is that we have choices. And those choices do equate to privilege because many other countries don't know what choice means. Let that sink in for a second. They don't even know what the word choice means because they are only given what is available. And as Americans, that perspective does not exist. It just doesn't. We expect choice. We expect value in things. We expect opportunities. That would be a privilege.
All in all, every country has its pros and cons. Through trial and error, many African Americans have found a new home in Africa. For some who have moved over there more flippantly, African living has often not met their expectations, and they've ended up moving back to the States. The moral of this video is to do your homework and plan effectively before deciding to up and leave the US for Africa.
I love that he ended with doing your homework because that's what I was thinking in my head. I was like, all right, I want to definitely say that in this video. If you're going to leave the country because you want to move someplace else or you want a different experience, do your research. Do your research. And if you think you're going to have a much better experience of things like choice compared to the United States, you may be in for a big surprise. And if you are prepared for that, you're going to do fine because you understand, okay, it's going to be different and I'm prepared for that and I'm okay with that. But if you're going there thinking, I hate this country is crap, this country hates black people, I'm moving to Africa, you may be in for a big surprise when you realize what actual oppression looks like and what actual poverty looks like. Now, I also want to say this. There are some parts of Africa that are like this, right? Third world and are struggling, which is very sad. But there also are amazing parts of Africa as well that are thriving, that are building an infrastructure and are trying to get to a much higher level of living. It's happening. So I don't want this video to be, oh, all of Africa is this, because that's a lie. There are parts of Africa that are absolutely growing and are prospering and are trying to get to a certain level, but the overall moral of this video is sometimes the grass is not greener on the other side. And it's important to understand that before you make statements, generalized statements about this country and how this country hates black and brown people and treats black and brown people like trash, just be careful, because you may go to another country, that a homogenous society that is majority black, and you realize, wow, this is way worse than the States. And it also makes you realize that corruption and greed and things of that nature do not discriminate. Just because a country is majority black or has a majority black government does not mean that that country is not going to be susceptible to greed and to corruption. Just let that sink in for a second. Greed and corruption is not a white crime. It is a human crime across the board. Overall, that was a really great video. I enjoyed it a lot. It was right to the point. And again, it just kind of drove the point that it's very easy to complain when all you know is your perspective. Do your research. I'm gonna just say this. If you are an American, you got it good. It is a blessing to be an American. I don't care what anybody has to say. I would never in a million years trade my citizenship to be a citizen of a different country. I just wouldn't. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this video. Do you think the guy had some good points to make about what it's like living in a different country and how it does give you a different perspective as an American as far as the privileges that we have and things that we take for granted every single day that we don't even realize that we take for granted. So let me know if you guys had the same experience and what your thoughts are. I would love, love, love to know. If you enjoy my content, please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit my notification bell so you know when I post a brand new video. If you also want to follow me on other social media platforms, I'm available on TikTok and on Instagram under CurlyBoyChuck. Until next time, peace.